Hi, I'm Michael Timms, and I'm about to have a productive conversation with Mike Vardy.
Accountability. It's a word that gets thrown around in leadership circles, but more often than not, it's misunderstood. Too many leaders weaponize it. They turn it into blame and punishment rather than fostering ownership and trust. But what if accountability wasn't something leaders held others to, but rather something they inspired in their teams? That's exactly what Michael Timms, leadership consultant, TEDx speaker, fellow Canadian, and author of How Leaders Can Inspire Accountability, is here to unpack. Michael has worked with thousands of leaders, helping them shift from a culture of finger pointing to one of continuous improvement and real results. His book, praised by leadership expert and guest of A Productive Conversation multiple times, Marshall Goldsmith, as the ultimate guide to embracing accountability, well, it lays out 3 essential habits that separate great leaders from the rest. In this episode, we explore why accountability isn't about control, it's about influence. We talk about the difference between leadership and management, how coercion and fear-based leadership fail, and why simply swapping the phrase holding people accountable for supporting people to be accountable can change everything. If you're ready to lead with more trust, respect, and impact, this conversation is for you. Let's get started. Michael, thanks so much for taking the time to join me on A Productive Conversation today.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
We had a lot of time to build rapport during the preamble before we hit record. And what's great is, when we chat, it's very interesting when the Canadians get together. It's like,
it's a surprise to us to realize that we're 2 Canadians.
And we're literally not far from each other. We're a half a day's drive, really, depending on how the ferry works out. But nonetheless, Michael, the book is called, and I've got it here on my iPhone right now. I got rid of my Kindle. If you want to find out why, you can look up Steve Dotto's video that I appeared on as to why I don't have a Kindle anymore. How Leaders Can Inspire Accountability, 3 Habits That Make or Break Leaders and Elevate Organizational Performance. Steve Dotto, another Canadian. This is going to be a full CanCon podcast. I'm glad you didn't say a boot instead of about when we kick things off. So the book, really, one of the big takeaways I got out of the gate was accountability really isn't about blame or punishment, but ownership, of those results, right? So why do so many leaders, and we're going to get into leaders versus managers. I love to talk about management versus leadership, but why do leaders struggle with the distinction of ownership of results versus blame or punishment?
I think that the reason we get, and it's not just managers. I think employees also feel that anytime that they're talking about, the management starts to talk about accountability, it's like, oh, great, this is going to be another, beating session here. But I think that for whatever reason, our world has used the word accountability as a euphemism for blame and punishment. When that politician, we need to hold that politician accountable. That's what people say. But what they're really meaning is, that politician is to blame and they should be punished.
Right.
But just a euphemism that we've used for blame and punishment, which is kind of funny to me because it's the complete opposite. It's the complete opposite of what accountability is. Accountability is taking ownership yourself, not blaming other people. So we've really, as a society, bastardized that word, and it's now something that people tend to fear and use as a weapon. We've really weaponized that word, and that's a shame.
It gets me thinking about nuance. But during our preamble, we talked about there's the middle. And there's no 50-50. When people talk about balance, I mean, it's not, hey, it's either this way or that way. It's not an on-off switch. There's a lot going on in the middle. What role, especially when it comes to, the inspiring of what you discuss in terms of accountability as opposed to the euphemism that we're talking about with blame and punishment, where does nuance fit into this? And how does a leader kind of break free of the absolute stuff that can really kind of weigh us down?
Well, I think the one nuance that can help leaders break free of this break this uh, misuse of the word accountability um, is to stop saying I'm going to hold you accountable or we need to hold you accountable. Right? If you want somebody to be punished, like, hey, there should be consequences, and let's talk about consequences. Okay, let's not switch that word out. Um, but really, what we need to be doing is we need to be supporting people to be accountable. I need support to be accountable. And I would suggest most people do. So I would say instead of holding people accountable, it's just a very, just a minor change of how you're describing it. But we want to support people to be accountable and recognizing that we all need that support. Sorry, what was the second part of your
No, no,
question?
no. It's just that really kind of leans into the idea of leadership versus management. I think it's so fascinating because a leader and a manager is a title. A leader is more of a way you approach it. Right? I want to hear from you that distinction because I think a lot of people when they're in quote a management situation or they're managers, they get they feel that automatically makes them a leader. Oh, I'm in a leadership position because I'm in management. Can we dive into that a little bit? Because I think that that's also something that can lead to this idea of, you know, the I'm going to hold you accountable kind of thing. And then there's fear around that, right?
Yeah, I think it's scary when people, kind of anoint themselves as a leader because they're in a management position or they're in a leadership position. When people call them a leader or a leadership team, I kind of see, I have this mental picture of Napoleon crowning himself emperor, saying, I am emperor. I have the authority to do that. The only person that has the authority to call you a leader is, somebody who's willing to follow you. You don't have the authority to call yourself a leader. And, management is a position. It shows up on the org chart. The word leader should not show up on the org chart, right? It's not a position. It's the way that you influence other people. And there's really, the way that you can influence people, sure, you could say there's a lot of different ways, but I think there's basically two ways to influence people. You can influence people through coercion, which is, hey, look, if you do what I want you to do, things are going to work out well for you. And if you don't, things are not going to work out well for you. That's coercion. Um, or through leadership, through forming trust and respect, and having people respect you so much that they would be willing to follow your direction and follow your lead. And that is the distinction between. I mean, that really the distinction is between leadership and coercion. Recognizing that a manager that's apples and oranges. We're talking about a position on the org chart, whereas leadership is how you actually choose to influence people.
How does somebody who's been thrust into a position, a leadership position, kind of avoid the coercion, the bullying that can take hold? Because I think, as far as I'm concerned, and I'd love again, correct me if I'm wrong. That's the easy way. It's the path that maybe has the least amount of resistance. So how does someone who's in a leadership position or is aspiring to be a leader avoid going down that path of coercion or, for lack of a better term, bullying?
I think people coerce others and take that it's my way or the highway approach because they don't have the skills. They just don't know what those skills are, and I think B, because it comes from a place of insecurity. I don't know what I'm doing, so I need to appear like I know what I'm doing. And I think the best way to avoid becoming the type of manager, the person that's in a leadership position that nobody likes, that my way, the highway person, is to admit, hey, I don't know. I don't have all the answers here. The reason why you were hired is because you're smart, and hopefully you're smarter than I am. And my job is to say, I don't have all the answers. My job is to get really clear on what are the outcomes we need to achieve. We'll have a discussion about that, but at the end of the day, my job is to make sure that we are crystal clear on what outcomes we're trying to achieve. Your job is to figure out how we're going to get there. And the way that we do that as a leader is to say, hey, Mike, what do you think we should do? And nothing builds trust and respect. Like immediately when I ask you, hey, Mike, I really respect your opinion. Can I ask you for some advice? What do you think we should do here? Like immediately your brain just gives you a dose of dopamine and you like me a little bit more. Like,
Yeah.
I like that Michael guy. He's a great guy.
Yeah.
Because he asked for my opinion. Like I said, a leader's job is simply, hey, what are the key things that we need to accomplish? And I'm going to ask for your advice. I'm going to ask for his advice. I'm going to ask for her advice. And then we're going to, chart that path forward together. So, and I think that is how you gain the respect. And people walk away from those types of interactions and be like, hey, this person's humble. They're not a dictator. They're a good communicator. Like all of those positive things that we think about, great leaders, I think really comes down to this is the direction we want to go in. How do you think we should get there?
Well, yeah, you open the book with, where have all the great leaders gone, right? Can you give me some examples and our listeners some examples of great leaders that not just, kind of avoid habit one, which is, don't blame, which we've covered. We're going to get into the other two habits in just a moment, but actually kind of embody the spirit of, those three habits that you discuss.
Colin Powell
Mm.
is a guy that comes to mind who really embodies that. Now, I think a lot of people from a military background, have learned that blame in a leadership position is how you destroy trust and destroy your teams. And they've also learned there's a great practice in the military about doing debriefs, lessons learned debriefs,
After action reports and things like that.
after action reviews. That is actually, I think, the term they use.
Mm-hmm.
That is a really cool practice of looking in the mirror, and oftentimes it's the leader that goes first.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think I have seen, Colin Powell is a great example because, unfortunately, I mean, such an amazing career came down to he was put in a bad position. Went to the United Nations, convinced them there's weapons of mass destruction because that was the information that he had, and there was a lot of pressure, to get to that point. But that, unfortunately, that's the biggest mistake of his career, that he had missed, and that's what he's going to be remembered for. But although there were in my opinion, so many other people that deserved the blame for that, he owned them. And he said, that was a lesson for me. And I'm going to be more rigorous, next time in my analysis of the facts before I come to any conclusions. And I'm going to do a better job of, holding off the pressure to come to a certain conclusion. That was a colossal, that was such a huge moment of taking ownership and like one of the greatest examples of personal accountability that I can think of.
There's a humility there too. There's a civility and a humility. And I mean, again, we don't really get political on this show, but no matter what side of the aisle, no matter where you lean, like you have to admire that. I think that good leaders transcend those oh gosh, I wouldn't say polar opposites, but those although they can be, they transcend that stuff, right? They're able to, you're able to kind of find common ground, right?
Yeah, well, another political example is Dwight Eisenhower, and
Yeah.
because that actually his quote is the middle way, and he was also another guy that really embodies personal accountability, and because he lived such a high standard of personal accountability, that's what endeared people to him.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and there's actually a note he kept in his wallet um, that was to be read, to be given to the press and read to the press in case they lost. And this note was kept in his wallet, even, for example, before D-Day, and it effectively said, I the troops have fought with bravery and valor. I've withdrawn the troops. If there's any blame or fault, it is mine alone. And he didn't really think anything of it, but the people who found it later was like, holy smokes, like that's such a gesture of humility and greatness. And that's why people loved him. But it is funny that that's the one thing that people are in, especially in today's world, people are so afraid to admit mistakes. Because everybody is so fanatical about holding everybody accountable. Nobody is willing to do it. And that's why I think we have so few great leaders, because everybody's afraid to say, hey, look, I own this. This was my bad. And this is what we're going to do to make sure that this doesn't happen again. And we create a better future than the past.
I also think that people are also afraid of admitting that they don't know, that they just don't know. Like there is this, I don't have the knowledge, I don't have the understanding, just being vulnerable in that sense. Not vulnerable, because you hear the term vulnerable and it ends up being tied to emotion in a lot of cases, right? Like it ends up, but there is a sense of like, if I don't, and this comes with, I mean, again, with time and wisdom and experience, you eventually realize like, look, I don't know everything. And what happens if I just admit I don't know it? What is that a sign of weakness? Is that a sign? But I think that presents itself in that way too, right? Would that be another area? I know this doesn't necessarily get into the accountability, but it does have that self accountability aspect.
It does. And I think it's very related because, one of the key things that, when you demonstrate a really high level of personal accountability, it creates that psychological safety that, is necessary to build trust and respect and to get things done. And when people talk about being vulnerable, you know what? You can't really be truly vulnerable until you're really self-confident. Until you are truly confident in my skills and abilities, like, hey, I know what I'm good at, and I know what I'm not good at, and I'm totally okay saying what I'm not good at, and I'm totally okay saying that I don't know what to do here, because I am supremely confident in my own abilities and what I know I'm good at. And I think, it also requires confidence in your ability to to communicate and facilitate your way to a positive outcome. Because when you relinquish control and you say, I really don't know what to do, you do have to have the confidence and a skill set to be able to say, but I know you're really smart people, and I also have the skill to facilitate this conversation to get us to a great place. I think that's probably where a lot of my confidence has come from which has given me that ability to let go and say, oh, hey, I'm definitely not the smartest person in the room, and I definitely don't know what we should do here. What do you think we should do? And my skill then is to take what they say and bring it together to a clear path forward.
This leads to the second habit, which we've kind of touched on a little bit, the idea of looking in the mirror, right? So uh, as soon as I read that kind of got into that, I thought of journaling immediately, like Marcus Aurelius's meditations and so on and so forth. Nothing that he had a book deal for. Like it's not like he set out to go, I'm going to get a deal and publish this thing. It was his thoughts. Isn't do you think journaling is one of those valuable things that allow you to look in the mirror? But I think I'm throwing you a huge softball here, but I'm going to ask you anyway. Like journaling, do you journal? Do you think it's something that is worth doing? Or do you think any kind of reflective practice can kind of help you look in the mirror better in terms of, leadership?
Well, I think there's a number of things you can do to help look in the mirror. I think journaling is good. I think just writing, reading and writing, learning, being in that learning mindset. But I think one of the most helpful things you can do to really look in the mirror is to ask for feedback. And the best way, as I already alluded to this earlier, really the best way to ask for feedback is to ask for advice. Because what happens is, we look, and there's been a ton of research that shows we don't know ourselves very well. We are not a good judge, typically, of what we're good at and what we're not good at. And in order to get that clarity, we need other people's input,
Right.
and we need a lot of it.
Hmm.
And the problem is in my work, when I work with management teams and executive teams, the very first thing we do is a leadership assessment, and we get people's feedback on a number of different items, and almost always, either the lowest or one of the lowest items is my manager asks for feedback. Enough. Um, we don't do that enough. And I think the reason we don't do that enough, and the reason why we kind of stay in this cone of silence, sort of like, or this echo chamber, um, is because we don't know how to handle feedback. And I think a lot of people are afraid to give us that feedback that we need to hear. But when you ask for advice instead of feedback, people are far more willing to give you advice, because advice is future looking,
Yeah.
right? It's future. I'm asking for advice. What should I do in the future? I'm not asking you, Mike, to beat me up for my past mistakes. And that's when you say, hey, do you have any feedback for me? People are like, well, flip, I could tell you a whole bunch of things that you've screwed up and that I don't like, but I'm not comfortable saying that.
Yeah.
And so people remain, like I said, in this echo chamber, this cone of silence, because they don't know how to ask for feedback, and they don't know how valuable it is. It's valuable not just because you're going to be more self-reflective and you're going to be like, oh, I really am good at this, or I really need to work on this. But it also gives you, wouldn't you like to know what everybody else thinks of you? Um, I think it might be scary, but that's such a huge advantage, to know what other people think of you, because it gives you leverage to change their perspective about you. And again, the way you get that insight is by asking for advice often. And again, as I mentioned, it also makes people like and respect you and builds a tremendous amount of trust.
Okay, so as you're talking about this, my brain is going, advice is feedback and feedback is advice, and both yes and no, right? Like, so what I mean by that is advice can turn into feedback, and then that comfort, to your point, of people willing to give that feedback within advice, like you can find it there, right? You know what I mean? I just find, like, words, as a writer, you're a writer, it's like words kind of like, it's just that when did you realize, or was this always something that you kind of recognized, that you could get the feedback from the advice and it was just like a flip of the switch for you?
Um, I think um, I think Marshall Goldsmith has talked about that.
Yep.
I think he was the person who first gave me that insight.
Marshall's been on the show a few
Um,
times, and he's a great
is
guy.
it
And
really?
yeah. He's been on the show a few times.
Wow, finally
Absolutely.
a company of greatness. That's
Y-
great. Not
Yep.
just you, but also Marshall Goldsmith. But yeah, so I think, and that's a really powerful insight. And actually, there's a lot of tricky ways to get feedback. Critical feedback, or I'd say helpful feedback, corrective feedback. There's some tricky ways, some sneaky ways to do that. And I think asking for advice is kind of disguising
Sure.
feedback in a way that number one, makes people more comfortable giving it to you, but also, and this is Marshall's point, it makes it more actionable. Like, hey, Michael, you totally screwed that up and you really suck at this. What do I do with that? Like, where do I go with that? But when I ask somebody, say, hey, do you have some advice? How should I handle this situation in the future? It's not going to hurt me as bad, right?
Yeah.
When you get asked for feedback and you're asking about the past, it's going to sting. And there's nothing you can do about it. But if you ask for advice and you're asking for, like, what do I do in the future? That you tend to get less hurtful, more helpful feedback and advice.
as we get close to wrapping up, I want to be conscientious of time. The third habit is to engineer the solution. So I immediately go to tools. Like that's just where my brain goes. So like task management tools, there's automate. You talk about automations that you can set up. One of the things you mentioned in the book, most leadership competency models read like Dr. Frankenstein's instruction manuals for assembling the perfect leader. Like, people, they'll get the tools to help with this kind of solution and they'll use them ad hoc, like as they are given to you, like, oh, this system worked for this business. Therefore, if we just apply this to our business, then it will work. And again, this is where we get back to the idea of nuances and stuff. A good example would be, hey, what did you do this week? Reply with some bullet points to let me know what you did. So that way we can make sure that we're on the same page. Whereas there's these tools, these task management tools that people could just you check off the boxes. You could do those reports internally and then therefore allow you to deal with the qualitative aspects of work as opposed to the quantitative, because sending off bullet points just tells you, hey, here's 6 things I did or 5 things I did or what have you. So can we talk a little bit about once you've done these other habits? And by the way, this is a 2-parter. These habits, to me, they're not sequential, right? They're baked in. They're more of a harmony than a serial kind of thing, So what are some of the things that people can do, a leader can do to kind of, engineer these solutions in a way that, first off, allows less friction, more flow, and also aligns harmoniously with the other habits?
Yeah. I'm going to give you a little bit of a preamble because
Sure.
this is a preamble I should have done earlier because, the reason I think why this is such an important conversation for your podcast, for your listeners, is because you're all about productivity and, really how do you save time? How do you manufacture? How do you create more time and be more efficient with your time? If you think about how we waste time the most, I think the least productive way we spend our time is in turf wars, email wars, finger pointing, blame games, and unnecessary friction with other human beings.
Right.
And there's tremendous amount of wasted time there. And I think the reason I think this is so relevant to your audience is that by living these 3 habits of personal accountability, you avoid a lot of those pitfalls that create all of that wasted time. If you just simply resist the urge to blame people when things go wrong, you're gonna save so many hurt feelings, so many unnecessary conversations, and other people are going to be talking about that when you blame them, and they're not going to be talking about that when you don't blame them. When you look in the mirror, again, nothing kind of settles down and brings down conflict quicker than when you say, "Hey, look, here's the problem. But here's my part in this."
Yeah.
Pool, all of a sudden, okay, the pool that brings the temperature right down. Okay, and now we're not talking about pointing fingers. We're talking about solving problems.
Real quick,
Engineering
real quick. That mirror has to be a clear mirror and not a funhouse mirror too, right? It can't be a distorted mirror. It's got to be a very clear, clean. It can have smudges and stuff on it, but it can't be a distorted mirror.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And when we get to engineer solution, that is the toughest one. I think people intuitively understand, don't blame, that can cause a lot of damage. I think people intuitively get, looking in the mirror and the positive impact that has on other people and on results. Engineering the solution is a little bit is a little bit more challenging because it's a different mindset. It's systems thinking. And that is really how when you stop thinking about problems as people are the problem, and you start thinking about problems as this is maybe a process, this is a systems challenge, that is going to save you so much time, not just in the immediate, kind of the gong show that erupts when you start to blame people for problems and when you assume that the person is the problem, which, by the way, is usually either completely incorrect or at least partially incorrect. Because the more we learn about problems, the more we know that it's because of either poor systems, poor processes, or a complete lack of processes. And if we simply had some systems, processes, and tools, it would, it would prevent people from making these mistakes that we keep blaming them for, that we want to blame them for. And a lot of times, it's that shift that leaders need to make and realize: look, if this person is making a mistake or has made a mistake, have I set them up for failure by not having a process in place? I can give you just a quick example of
Sure.
that.
Yeah.
I use these live polling, app, and there's a lot of templates because we've created a lot of these different polls. And one time, my assistant and I discovered that somebody had accidentally deleted one of these templates, and I knew it wasn't me. And my assistant, she knew it wasn't her, and that just left one other person that it could be, which was a junior person. Her name was Mel, and my assistant was like, "I am gonna murder Mel," and I was like, "We could do that, but before we do that, why don't we follow the 3 habits?" I was upset at Mel too, because
Sure.
this was essentially going to be I was going to have to rebuild this. But looked in them. I tried to resist the urge to blame. That did not work. I was really upset. My
Well,
sister was really upset.
yeah.
So then we went to habit 2, and we said, look in the mirror, and then I said, and when we did that, I said, you know what? I've almost accidentally deleted one of these templates. And my assistant said, kind of sheepishly, so have I.
Yeah.
I said, well, why? Because our templates are mixed in with our work in process, and we're deleting our work in process all the time. And it's super easy to mistake a template for a finished project, right? That we don't need anymore. And so because there was a poor process in place, and we had laid a trap and Mel happened to be the one that fell into that trap. The engineered solution to that problem is simply create a folder called templates and move all of our templates into the folder. That's all it took. But oftentimes it's habit 2. When we look in the mirror, it often leads to an engineered solution. If we say, hey, look, I've made this mistake. This person's made a mistake. What can we do to prevent all of us from making this mistake in the future? And that's really the mindset that I think leaders need to have to create a workplace of trust, respect, and continuous improvement.
Well, and what's great about that too is that the looking in the mirror, and you doing that reduces the need for habit 1 to rear its head because you've taken care of it. And as soon as you said I deleted the template, I'm like, well, why wasn't it like my immediate reaction? Why wouldn't you have put it there in the first place, right? But emotion, right? Like that's the thing is that humans, like we when I talk about the idea of the realms of productivity, like there's humans and there's obviously computers, there's emotion and logic. Reason lives in that middle area, and that's a reasoned approach. And as you go through the book, there's everything leans itself into reason here. Before I let you go, last question. What is a question that every leader should ask themselves daily to ensure, or on a regular cadence, but let's say daily, to ensure they're setting the right accountability example?
I think every day we encounter problems, and I think most of our days are spent kind of problem solving around these issues that come up. I think one of the most powerful things that leaders can ask themselves is, how may I have contributed to this problem? Because that gives you power to create a better future. If you're not asking that question, and if you assume the problem is 100% somebody else or 100% some external factor, you have no power. But really asking that question gives you power to make some changes, to prevent problems from happening in the future. And people respect you when you admit, when you can find something and admit it.
Michael, this has been a great conversation. I know we could dive into things more deeply, but people need to dive into the book, How Leaders Can Inspire Accountability, 3 Habits That Make or Break Leaders and Elevate Organizational Performance. Where can people pick up the book, and where can people keep up with the work you're doing?
Yeah, I think so. You can just Amazon is really the place where you can find the book. It's also on Apple Books, so you can get it there. If you want a quick summary of probably maybe a more succinct summary than of the 3 habits than what we had right here, you can watch my TED Talk. It's how to claim your leadership power. So actually, if you just simply Google Michael Timms, that'll probably be the first thing that pops up.
Thanks so much for having a productive conversation with me today.
It has been a great conversation. Thanks so much for inviting me, Mike.
Thanks to Michael for joining me on the program today. You can find all of the relevant links and other show notes at mikevardy.com/podcast619 or wherever you get your podcasts. Wherever you're listening to this right now, you'll see the show notes right there. And if you're not already following the show or subscribed to the show, now is a great time to do it. Just click the subscribe button or the follow button, whether you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or even YouTube. That's it for this episode. I'm going to hold you accountable. No, I'm not. I'm not going to hold you accountable to subscribing. I hope to see you next time when we bring you another episode of A Productive Conversation. Until then, I'm Mike Vardy, the host of A Productive Conversation, reminding you to stop doing productive and start being productive. See you later.